Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over all of the weapon classes in Godfall. Now these weapon classes are longswords, dual blades, polearms, warhammers, and greatswords. You also do have shields, but shields are something that you can use with every other weapon, so those aren't really a part of the weapon class system. So all the weapons in the game will fall into one of those 5 classes, and all those weapon classes have their own abilities, they have their own attack combos, they have their own specialities that they all focus on, and they do all scale off of different stats. Now the only thing we have heard about the different scaling of the weapons is that warhammers are going to scale their damage off of spirit, but that's pretty much all we have heard about how the damage of them will scale. So we don't know all the weapon attack combos and the weapon abilities for all the weapon classes yet, so I'm going to specifically go over all the information for the dual blades because we have most of the information for those, and then I'm going to go over a general overview of all the weapon classes and what their play style and specialities are. And I'm not really going to go into all the different statting and perks of weapons because I have gone over that in a gear related videos before. I want this to more specifically be about the weapon classes themselves because the weapon classes will have every weapon no matter the stats, no matter the perks. If it's dual blades, it's going to be in the dual blade weapon class and have all the same combos. Even though we don't know the specifics of all the different weapon classes and their combo attacks, we can assume that they all have combo attacks in the same categories. So for the dual blades, they have a light combo attack, and I'm not going to go over the specific buttons because this is for PlayStation. I play on PC and it's going to be different buttons that you can change if you're on PC, etc. We have a light attack combo, which presumably is going to be the main attack you're using most of the time. We have a breach attack combo, we have a charged heavy attack, and then we have a rushing strike. And that is essentially all of your different attack combos. Now I'm assuming some of those are going to change a little bit, possibly the rushing strike, possibly the breach attack combo, but I'm assuming stuff like the light attacks and the heavy attacks are going to be across all the different weapon classes. They will have different animations and different damage amounts of different scaling. That category will most likely be with every weapon class. And then we have weapon techniques. Now weapon techniques charge up over time, and then you use certain button combos to unleash these, and if you use one you can't use the other unless you fill it back up to use the other. So for the dual blades, we have inner focus, which seems to be just a big damage buff. It sounds almost like an enrage to me, so you enrage yourself doing a bunch of damage. I'm not exactly certain on the specific numbers for that, and I'm not sure if it say gives an attack speed increase or something like that. It's just a general damage increase. And then the southern technique, so the first one was considered the northern technique, which is inner focus. The second one is the southern technique, which is mortal coil. Now for the dual blades, this is essentially turning them into kind of like a chain weapon and pulling enemies into you. So essentially you will have all of these different weapon combo attacks that you'll just be fighting enemies, doing all your different combos, doing damage, killing enemies, and while you're doing all of that, your weapon techniques will be charging up, but then you will choose one of your weapon techniques to use for whatever situation it is. Now on top of the combos and abilities you have for whichever weapon class you're using, you also have the chance to use a shield with every weapon class, and you can bring this out very quickly to block attacks. You can throw this, and with the skill system in the game, you can also learn additional shield abilities, so you have that to also mix on top of all the abilities you have for your specific weapon class. But like I said, the shield is something different outside of your weapon class, so I'm not going to go over that in this video. So past that, I want to do an overview of every weapon class and what they specialize in, because every weapon class is good at doing something. Like dual blades is really good at fighting soft enemies and doing damage very quickly to those, but they're not as good at fighting highly armored enemies. Now for the overview of all the different weapon classes, I'm going to be using an article that did a pretty good write-up about all the different weapon classes and what they specialize in from using information developers have talked about before. I will have a link to that article in the description if you guys want to check that out for yourself. Now you'll also be able to have 2 different weapons equipped in your loadout at the same time, and you will be able to switch between these in combat. And there's actually a mechanic to switching between your different weapons, and it's called polarity attacks. Now when you're using one of the weapons, you will be filling up a bar, and when you go to switch to the other weapon, when your bar is filled, it will cause a big AoE, that's your polarity attack, and it will also increase the damage of the weapon you just switched to for a certain amount of time, pretty much giving you a boost and giving you a reason to stay on one weapon until filling up that polarity meter, so you will always have a boost switching back and forth. And there will also also be different stats in the game that affects this. There will be some stats to fill up the meter quicker, so there will be a possibility of you always having your polarity buff up anytime you're using a weapon. There will be then other damage increases and other possible stats built into that polarity system. So the first up is the Polearm. Now the Polearm has a longer range than other weapons, and if you prefer to have some space between you and the enemy, this is the weapon for you. It naturally gives you more time to dodge if an enemy comes your way because you have that range buffer in between you and the enemy. The Polearm can also be launched with great force like a javelin at the enemy, so you're able to actually throw the javelin, giving you somewhat of a ranged attack. And the downside of this weapon is that it does have reduced damage because it has that longer range and the ability to throw it to even just have a overall ranged attack. And the Polearm seems to be more focused on heavy piercing attacks, and from the gameplay we've seen of them, they also seem to have a lot of sweeping attacks, so you're able to cleave a lot of enemies from a decent distance, so you're able to have some of that buffer between you while also cleaving down enemies. Now next up is the Longsword, which is the balanced middle of the road weapon. So it balances its damage, its cooldowns, it has easier to use weapon combos, so it's going to overall be easier to use for people learning the game. It's not going to have any big negatives or downsides to it, so if you use it wrong, you're not going to be doing anything. It's going to be that middle of the road, most likely consistent damage. It's going to be more neutral on stat scaling, so most likely it's not going to scale super well off one stat and have really bad scaling off of another. And with it having not a lot of negatives and having that more consistent damage, it also won't have those big burst windows either. Now next up is the Greatsword, which is right along the lines of what you would think a Greatsword would be doing. It's very slow but extremely powerful attacks that has a lot of slashing, cleaving attacks to be able to cleave down multiple enemies at once. But again, it's very slow. It's probably going to have slower animations, bigger wind-up attacks that then if you hit those attacks are going to do a massive amount of damage. But with that really massive amount of damage and burst, you also have more opportunities to mess up and be punished for that. So if you're doing a big wind-up attack that could do a massive amount of damage and you end up missing that, you end up just wasting a lot of time doing an attack where you're vulnerable to attacks while doing it, and then you end up missing, doing no damage. Unlike something like the Longsword that we just went over that would be consistent on the attacks all the way throughout. Doesn't have that big damage and that big burst damage once you use it correctly and hit those big attacks. Now next up are the dual blades. Now these are very fast attacking weapons where you have to be super close to the enemy. These are really effective against soft targets, so unarmored enemies, but once you get to more armored enemies, they're not going to be as strong, and they're going to be really good against single target soft enemies because they don't have as much cleave as most of the other weapons. They will also be super good at finishing off close to death enemies. So say you could use a Greatsword and you could hit something with a super strong attack of a Greatsword, or cleave a bunch of enemies with a Greatsword, have a bunch of low enemies, and then you could switch to the dual blades to very quickly finish them all off. So these weapons are very good at being agile, doing really good single target damage, not good against armored targets, and definitely not good against big groups of enemies, or at least not as good as some of the other weapons. Now finally, we have the Warhammers, which are the slowest weapon in the game, but also have the hardest hitting attacks in the game. So if you go from, say, Longswords, you would then have the medium between Longswords and Warhammers would be the Greatswords, and the Warhammers would be at the high end of slowest but hardest hittest weapons in the game, and they seem to be really focused on having that slow but super strong single attacks that will most likely be good at breaking armor and possibly killing smaller enemies in single hits. But with that comes probably one of the highest skill-based weapons in the game, because if you say do this slowest attack in the game that would normally be a super hard hitting attack, but you miss or don't hit the target you want to hit, then you just took a ton of time. You were vulnerable to attacks the entirety of the time, so you have that really low end possibility if you're not using it correctly, but then you have those super high burst windows where if you hit the attacks you want to hit on the enemy you want to hit, you're going to be doing some of the highest damage you can possibly do with any of the weapon classes. So that was just an overview of the weapon classes in Godfall. Now, it was pretty sparse on information because we just don't have a lot of the specifics of the different combos, the different weapon techniques of all the different weapon classes in the game. And this is just the base of all the weapon classes. So this is kind of their base niches that they have. Now, a lot of this stuff can be changed and augments with having this game be a looter style game. You can change different stats, you can have different damage increases, you can have different perks, different effects. All this type of stuff can change how these weapons play and can change what they're really good at. So this is just the base, and then you build on this base with all your different perks, all your different builds, and so on. So subscribe if you want to see more Godfall or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about all the different weapon classes of Godfall, and thanks for watching.